David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the show. Let's get right into it. I've been waiting since the third Democratic debate last Thursday to get some post-debate polling. Yesterday early, we got one post-debate poll, but one is just one, alas, and I wanted to wait until we had at least a second post-debate poll, and we now have that, so we're going to be able to look at them in detail. Let's sort of refresh the backstory. The backstory, of course, being that basically since even before he formally announced his candidacy, I think it was in April, former Vice President Joe Biden has been leading the polls. We've seen Bernie Sanders in second place for quite some time, but one of the storylines of polling for the last several months has been that as Joe Biden sort of drops off from what was around a 44-ish% high at one point months ago, it has been Elizabeth Warren who has been sort of steadily picking up 1 to 1.5 points every single month, with Bernie Sanders basically remaining in this second place spot. And that has been shaken up now. I think at this point, we have to say that there is a different paradigm, which is that the momentum has shifted behind Elizabeth Warren. I can't think of another candidate who is even remotely in this thing who has the momentum of Elizabeth Warren right now. So let's take a look first at what the polls look like in general. You'll notice if you're watching along with me, the green line at the top going above 40% several months ago is Joe Biden, and Joe Biden has had his ups and downs, now settling at an average of 27 in recent polls and still in first place for now. The second line on this graph has been Bernie Sanders. And as you can see, Bernie Sanders steadily in second place for many, many months, although you have seen a sort of convergence of the brown line, which is Elizabeth Warren, who was polling right around 6% months ago, slowly but steadily climbing, and now actually jumping into second place statistically in an average of recent polls, ahead of Bernie Sanders, 18.3 to 16.3. This is, of course, an average of recent polls. Now, some important caveats. 18.3 versus 16.3 is not some massive gulf. We could get one more post-third debate poll, and this could completely reverse itself, and Bernie Sanders could be exactly tied with Warren or ahead. These are general numbers that give us a sense of the momentum. Now, even more important, arguably, in terms of the number of polls, if you look right now at the last 10 polls, or the last 12 polls, or the last 14 polls, what you will see is that in half of them, Bernie Sanders is in second place. In half of them, Elizabeth Warren is in second place. Recency is weighted slightly more in these averages of recent pollings, and there is one particular recent poll in which Elizabeth Warren is solidly in second place. That's where this average comes from. So now that we've seen this trend line of Elizabeth Warren climbing with Bernie Sanders sort of holding steady, and again, please don't shoot the messenger. I hope that we're beyond the point of making personal attacks on me merely for reporting to you what it is that the polls say. As many of you know, I'm a Bernie Warren guy. I think that there are upsides to both of them. I think that together they are a very strong progressive sort of duo in the Democratic primary. We're just talking about the polls. Don't kill the messenger, okay? And by the way, if you're going to write to me and say the polls are only polling old people on landlines, we debunked that multiple times. That's not true. Let's really keep the conversation productive rather than resorting to this stuff. So we have two post-debate data points right now. The debate was last Thursday. We have two polls that were conducted after that debate. The first is the Politico Morning Consult poll. This is the poll in which Bernie Sanders is still in second place. Joe Biden, 32, Bernie Sanders, 20, Elizabeth Warren, 18. Bernie and Warren statistically tied, but Bernie Sanders ahead 20 to 18. You'll also notice that we still have seen no changes anywhere else to suggest that anybody other than Biden, Sanders, and Warren even remotely have a shot at this thing. Kamala Harris, despite some people on my Twitter telling me she obviously won the debate, nothing happening. She's still at 6%. Pete Buttigieg at 5, Beto maybe gaining a little bit up to 4%, Booker and Yang both at 3, and Klobuchar at 2. So that is one of the 2 post-debate polls. This one has a statistical tie between Bernie and Warren, with Bernie ahead by 2. The second post-debate poll that we have is an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, and this is the one that has Elizabeth Warren very solidly in second place, 25 to Bernie Sanders 14, with Biden still in first place with 31. Now, I do find it difficult to believe that Bernie Sanders is polling only 14% nationally, given everything else that we've seen recently. But, and again, I'm just the messenger, I'm just the analyst, I like Bernie. It sucks that I have to do these disclaimers, but they do help to mitigate a little bit of the crazy messages I get. There are actually now several recent polls which have Bernie near 14. The Hill last week had him at 15. The Economist had him at 16. Reuters had him at 16. And after the debate, the third debate last week, I actually got a ton of emails from people saying, David, I like Bernie, but I think that he's done. And some attributing it to the stagnant poll numbers relative to Elizabeth Warren's momentum. A lot of people emailing me saying, Bernie certainly didn't help himself with his voice being hoarse for the first half of the debate, combined with Elizabeth Warren getting to do rebuttals before Bernie almost every time. Since their views were very similar in terms of the content of their rebuttals, Bernie came off as if he was just saying me too to Warren merely because they went to her first for rebuttals. But more people than we've had in the last 6 months contacting me saying Bernie is done. And I hope that that's not the case. I don't believe Bernie is done from any objective point of view at this point in time. But anybody who's looking at the polling has to realize that the momentum is with Elizabeth Warren. And if you look at recent polls, if you look at the same polls over the last 4 months, you will notice that Joe Biden has, on average, lost a little bit. Bernie Sanders is roughly even to have lost a little bit. And Elizabeth Warren has just been steadily gaining 1 to 1.5 points a month. So momentum undoubtedly with Elizabeth Warren. Now, the conversation I want to have with you soon is about Bernie versus Warren, putting aside our personal feelings about things like who do we like better personality-wise, putting aside even everything but thinking objectively about the pragmatics of their platform. There is the idea, which I'm reading about more and more, that while Elizabeth Warren is certainly more moderate than Bernie Sanders, even though particularly domestically their policies are similar, I'm starting to see more and more opinions that Elizabeth Warren may be more effective as president in that her ideas are more likely to be able to be made effective via law, policy, or executive order than those of Bernie Sanders. Now, that's a very general statement. I think if we really want to deal with that seriously, we have to look at, okay, let's look at healthcare, Bernie versus Warren. Why specifically, if we are making the case that Warren's plan is more likely to be made a reality than Bernie's, why is it that we're saying that? When it comes to inequality, what specifically about Elizabeth Warren's plan versus Bernie's is more likely to become a reality? So the question is, even if we are more progressive, let's say, and we find Bernie to be more progressive than Warren, and I believe in a marginal sense he is there a way in which effective progress may be higher with Elizabeth Warren because she may be more likely to get, a few Republicans on board or whatever the case may be? I am merely asking the question. I am not telling you that that's the case. It's a pretty classic pragmatism versus idealism conversation, but sometimes when people say idealism, there's like a negative connotation attached to it or some kind of dismissive element. I love Bernie's ideas. So when I say idealism, what I mean is the ideas are great ideas and completely not controversial in many parts of the world that seem to have things figured out, Northern Europe and elsewhere. It's merely a practical question, and we're going to be dealing with this soon. But before I deal with it, I want to hear from you about it. Let me know your thoughts on that in terms of the practicality and potential for really affecting change with President Bernie versus President Warren. Okay, there is sort of an impeachment hearing against Donald Trump that has started. And I really thought long and hard about how to approach this story. And the first sort of question we have to ask is this really an impeachment hearing that has started in the House Judiciary Committee? And my sense is that it's not. This is being called a, quote, impeachment hearing, but I don't actually think that that is the right name for it. This is a hearing which, depending on what happens, in some abstract sense, could lead to an actual impeachment inquiry. And this is already, if you're saying, David, that sounds muddled, this is why I think that this is extraordinarily problematic. I try to tell you things as I see them truly without over or understating the importance of something. And the way that this has gone down so far is seeming to me like a self-destructive waste of time. And I'll explain why. So yesterday, the House Judiciary Committee had a hearing. They started interviewing Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. Corey Lewandowski gave Democrats nothing. And in fact, he generated some really good sound bites that right-wing media and Donald Trump are absolutely gushing about. He stonewalled. He brought a letter with him from the White House lawyer, Pat Cipollini, saying that executive privilege has been invoked. Now, there's an obvious question about, wait a second, Corey Lewandowski was the campaign manager, meaning Donald Trump was not president at the time that he was instructing Corey Lewandowski to do things. Could executive privilege really even be asserted given that Trump wasn't president at the time? It's a question that would have to be fought out legally, and we don't have an answer to that in the immediate. He refused to answer questions about conversations with Donald Trump, like a very well-behaved tool of Donald Trump and Trump praising him for it. And in the end, this to me was a pointless waste of time gong show. This was going to be the way it went down from day one. Lewandowski, even before the executive privilege letter was written and presented, said that he was looking forward to defending Donald Trump in these hearings. They were never going to get anything from Lewandowski. So then the question became, in not getting anything from Lewandowski, can Democrats make him, and by extension Donald Trump, look bad enough, look guilty enough to further the arguments of impeachment and a real bona fide impeachment inquiry? And I've said before, the whole point of an impeachment inquiry, if one were to be done, would not really be to remove Donald Trump via impeachment, because it's not going to happen. A Republican Senate is not going to convict Donald Trump on the basis of what's happened so far, certainly not before the November of 2020 election. The whole point, in my view, of an impeachment inquiry would be to publicize the content of the Mueller report. What's in the Mueller report is devastating to Trump. Most of the public has not read the Mueller report. So you do the impeachment inquiry to get the content of the Mueller report out there front and center. It distracts from Trump's campaigning. It may send Trump into a frenzy on Twitter where he may end up further self-incriminating. The only interesting thing that came out of this hearing that could be advantageous to Democrats is that Corey Lewandowski refused to say whether Donald Trump preemptively offered him a pardon. It's very interesting. Ultimately, I don't think that's going to go anywhere. We already know, colloquially, informally, that Donald Trump has implicitly dangled pardons in front of people, and it has had absolutely no consequences. So I think that this ultimately is a mistake. I believe that if you are really going to do a proper impeachment inquiry, you do it, you very clearly label it as such, and it is an impeachment investigation. This is a sort of, we've got some Democrats saying they believe Trump is impeachable, but this is just a hearing to talk to people, which, depending on what they say, could become a full-blown impeachment inquiry or attempt to impeach. I've said before, I'm fine with an impeachment inquiry if we're going to do it. I'm fine with saying we're not going to do the impeachment inquiry. Let's just focus on removing Donald Trump electorally in November of 2020. I'm fine with it either way. But this offhanded hearing of something that could sort of de facto be an investigation into whether there should be impeachment, vote the guy out in 2020 and remove him. And if you look at the media coverage over the last 24 hours of this, right-wing media is doing what we know they were going to do. They are going to say this is a partisan witch hunt. Corey Lewandowski went in there. He gave them nothing. Trump's Trump's happy with it. It unites the right around, we're not going to let Democrats pull this off. And then on the left, you hear Democrats saying Lewandowski's stonewalling, he's not answering questions, etc. But this is what they've been doing all along. There is no additional benefit to this. So I'm calling this a half-hearted pseudo-impeachment maybe hearing where witnesses will say nothing. I don't know what type of PR they expect to get that's beneficial to the cause of removing Donald Trump, but it is seeming to me very miscalculated. Now, I'm willing to have my mind changed. If you saw this and you thought, yeah, this is good, this is going to help us achieve something, let me know what that is and how it's going to help achieve it. As you know, I just call things what they are, and this is the way this looks to me. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. And make sure you're also following me on Twitch at twitch.tv/David Pakman for live streams happening weekly.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let me thank today's 2 new David Pakman Show members of the day. People who support the show through membership are really great people. They are also providing the #1 funding source for the show, and today's are Dustin Adams and Walter Toms. Dustin and Walter, really thank you. I mean, genuinely, I so appreciate your support. Consider membership sort of like you're tipping us. We try to put together revenue from YouTube advertising and other advertising revenue, but really what we're counting on, what we're depending on are memberships from people who sign up at joinpakman.com. Think about it like a tip when you go out to eat. You don't have to tip. We're still doing the show. You can keep consuming it for free, but if you like it, consider becoming a member at joinpakman.com by choice, not by force. Also want to say thanks to John Kralik. John Kralik has been a member for almost 5 years. Today's longtime sustaining member of the day. All right, let's get to Hatriot Mail. It is that time of the week, Hatriot Mail, when a professional voiceover artist does interpretive readings of the Hatriot Mail that I get. A quick reminder about Hatriot Mail first.
Because we don't care about liberal cucks so much that we spend our time writing to them. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So I think that this week's Hatriot Mail, I think it's racist, right? I mean, let's take a look at it.
Just came across this channel. Your channel is nothing but liberal propaganda appealing to uneducated f***ing idiots. I'm sure anyone who has Trump derangement syndrome and can't deal with the real world loves this channel. If anyone wants a good laugh, stop by and listen to this complete idiot and read the comments. Pure comedy. What happened to Obunga's red line?
So this entire Obunga and Obumba, are those racist terms about Barack Obama? My impression is that they are sort of ridiculing or referencing what are sort of like stereotypical quote backwards sounding African words or names or something like that. Is Obumba maybe related to bumbling, like a bumbling fool? I don't know. It doesn't sound great to me though. But once again, I think that it's important to remember that even when Hatriots engage with our content, when Hatriots show up on my YouTube channel and downvote my videos or leave a negative comment, it's still engagement. It still helps us on the YouTube algorithm. When you hate listen to my podcast, it's still good for me. It's still a listen that I can then go to an advertiser and say, this is the number we have. And if 5 or 10% of those are Hatriots, then that's 5 or 10% more that we can charge for advertising. Just remember that, folks. The best way to fight Hatriotism directly is to become a member on my website, joinpakman.com, using the coupon code HATRIOT40, HATRIOT 40. You save 40% off of your membership, and the Hatriots burst into flames spontaneously because their attempts to sabotage the show, to quote William Shatner, it's been a while since I said that, don't work. And that is a really great thing for independent progressive media. Okay, we've been talking basically since even before Donald Trump was elected about the coalescing and catalyzing of white supremacy and extremism in the United States. And my general view, my instinct at the beginning was that Donald Trump is not creating white supremacy. He's not creating anti-Semitism. He's not creating bigotry, probably. But he is, number one, sort of coalescing it, and number two, making the bigots and the white supremacists and the anti-Semites more comfortable being out in the open, being more public about their extreme views, and is getting them actually organizing to a greater degree. Now, that was my idea early on, and it does seem to be borne out, including by the former and even current white nationalists and white supremacists that we've spoken to. I was recently reviewing, in preparation for this story, my interview a couple of years ago with white nationalist Richard Spencer. He's someone in the movement. And again, he believes, Trump's not literally one of us, and it's not clear that he's creating more of us, but he is kind of fomenting this environment in which we are more likely to thrive or to do well or whatever the case may be, or organize. We now have a report from the Anti-Defamation League, and the report is called Hate Beyond Borders, the Internationalization of White Supremacy. And the report shows two things. Number one, it shows that white supremacy is under Trump, but really over the last 2 years, Trump is just a piece of what's going on, being internationalized, meaning that there are more links and sort of flow of white supremacist organization across country lines, including from the United States to Europe, and we'll dig into that in more detail in a second. The other thing that the ADL report shows is that there is also more weaponization of white supremacy. And my interpretation of weaponization is that what they're talking about is turning the ideas into activism. It doesn't necessarily have to mean physical violence, but it's the taking of the ideas and weaponizing them by making them real activism. This is a really well done study, and it combines sort of the political circumstances that are fueling this, as well as the technological circumstances, because that's a big thing as well. We recently interviewed former white supremacist Frank Mink, and he said there is now an ability to be radicalized and to have these extreme communities exist completely digitally, completely over the internet because of the technology that exists. So I'll tell you about some of the factors at play. Number one, the white supremacist conference scene has grown dramatically over the last couple of years. It includes American and European extremists everywhere from Sweden, Russia, and Estonia having in-person events, and they are internationalized. You have people flying all over to go to these white supremacist events. That is one element that is weaponizing and internationalizing white supremacy. You have the far-right nationalist parties in Europe. Some of those parties have ties to neo-Nazis directly, plain and simple. Others, it's a little bit more nuanced and sort of guised, but they are serving as a sort of central point of contact for many white supremacists that were previously isolated, in a sense. The immigration debate in both Europe and the United States has been another, I guess you would call it like a uniting issue for white supremacists who are looking to become more active, and immigration has been an issue that has coalesced and catalyzed a lot of that activism into something particular, a policy demand, so to speak, that these folks can rally around. Technology. We have to understand that the internet, messaging, Facebook, Twitter, Gab, WhatsApp, that is enabling technology that allows these groups and ideologies to cross country lines far more easily. So, for example, you've got the US-based group Women for Aryan Unity. Yeah. They now have chapters in Europe. So the immediate question is, what is it that needs to happen? The first thing is an electoral prescription, which is the nationalist leaders that are, if not directly supporting this, kind of indifferently allowing the environment in which this stuff grows and it becomes weaponized, those leaders need to be removed or stripped of power or marginalized depending on what the government system is. In the United States, this includes you've got to remove Donald Trump, period. In other countries, you're talking about representation in a parliamentary system, in a representative system. Really have to look at the particulars, but the leaders that are fomenting this implicitly or explicitly have to be removed, and hopefully we will start seeing the pendulum swing back in that direction in 2020. Once you cross country lines, at least here in the United States, it's possible to designate these groups foreign terrorist organizations. Internationally, that may not mean much, but here in the United States, it gives the State Department and law enforcement more resources and latitude to fight against these groups. So that's something that should be looked at as per this Anti-Defamation League report. The technology companies, because remember, technology is a big piece of what is allowing this to fester, foment, and grow. The technology companies, they basically already have terms of service that apply to what it is that we are seeing. It's more about enforcing those terms of service. And this is a much bigger issue. When I was on the Joe Rogan program 3 months ago, we talked a lot, 4 months ago actually, we talked a lot about the policies themselves versus their enforcement and sort of interrelated issues. And we could do an entire conversation just about that, and we have, but the enforcement of these policies and ways to limit these groups' ability to recruit and to spread their messages, that's also important. And what we really have to understand is that there are real world effects here, right? We are seeing terrorist incidents. We are seeing shootings. We are seeing Orthodox Jews being attacked out in public in Brooklyn and other places. We're seeing Jewish emigration out of certain European countries like France. I believe, going from memory, France has actually seen an outflow of Jewish residents thanks to the environment that is out there. So this is not merely, it's easy to say, oh, this is stuff that exists on the internet, period. No, there are groups that are tracking the real world impact, and it's significant. And we're seeing this stuff pervade the judiciary. We're seeing this stuff pervade law enforcement here in the United States. And this is a really, really good study that looks at exactly how it is being both weaponized and internationalized by a combination of these nationalist trends that we've been seeing combined with the technological factors that allow it to happen. We're going to be following up about this on our Instagram page at David Pakman Show on Instagram. Make sure you're following the show there. And while you're there, follow me as well. I posted a picture. I am on the road, as many of you who have been watching the show this week noticed. I posted a selfie with Nemo, the Adderall dog, as some of you know him. Please don't take offense to that. It's just a joke. And I posted a selfie with him on my personal Instagram this morning at david.pakman. Check it out. Follow me. Follow the show. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So whatever you believe the truth to be about the death of Jeffrey Epstein, there's a totally separate issue, which is why do so many Trump insiders end up having connections to Jeffrey Epstein? And quick disclaimer, anything even remotely touching Jeffrey Epstein is instantly demonetized by YouTube. So please consider supporting the show directly so that we can keep covering the stories we want to cover, not having to worry about whether they will be monetizable or not. Jeffrey Epstein died in his jail cell on August 10th of an alleged suicide under what are strange conditions, we can call them. And I don't need to go all conspiratorial, the way in which he was found, the injury, something about it doesn't sound quite right to lots of people, and we may just never know the exact truth about what went down there. Okay. The background of that story has mostly been like the story that has been prevailing in the media. But there's another story, which is that it's not just Trump himself who's linked to Epstein. You might remember we had that video of Trump and Epstein at a party in the 90s, I believe it was, where Trump and Epstein are standing there together looking at and sort of evaluating the attractiveness of different young girls. And of course, there's much more serious allegations behind that as well. It's not just Trump. There are also Trump insiders connected to Epstein. There's a growing list, and this latest one is truly bizarre. So Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary is Steven Mnuchin, And Steven Mnuchin's name appears on a legal document for a company owned by Jean-Luc Brunel, who's an associate of Jeffrey Epstein. So you've got Epstein. His associate is Jean-Luc Brunel. Jean-Luc Brunel's company, Next Management Corporation, listed Steven Mnuchin as a, quote, state point of contact for the corporation. This is another connection between Epstein and Trump, this time via Steven Mnuchin. And Brunel himself, by the way, has also been accused of sexual assault and rape and of getting girls for Jeffrey Epstein. Now, obviously, immediately the media went right to the Treasury and said, why is Steven Mnuchin's name listed here? Why is he listed as a representative for Jean-Luc Brunel's company? Treasury spokesperson said it's, quote, not clear why Mnuchin was listed and that Mnuchin has no recollection of meeting Jean-Luc Brunel in his life. How strange is that? Mnuchin is listed, but the Treasury Department says that it's simply erroneous. But as usual, you sort of have to read between the lines. Let's take a look at the statement from the Treasury Department where they say, Secretary Mnuchin never served in any official capacity in Next Management Corporation, never did any business with nor knows either of the Brunel brothers, and never had any ownership stake in Next Management Corporation or any related entities. Secretary Mnuchin had no knowledge whatsoever that he was listed as a point of contact at an address he's not familiar with for a company that he's had no dealings with. That listing was clearly an error. Now, I'm not pretending I know the truth of this. I really don't. It's bizarre. I don't know the truth of it. But what I do know is that I recognize what we call weasel language when I see it. If you look at this statement, he never served in an official capacity. It's not denying that there could have been an unofficial capacity in which he served. He never had an ownership stake in Brunel's company. Of course, an ownership stake is not necessary to be in some way involved with a company. He didn't know that he was listed as a contact. Well, that is a very different thing than there is no reason whatsoever for him to be listed as a contact. He just didn't know it. Much like the others surrounding Epstein, Brunel disappeared from public view after Epstein was found dead in August. And it's just yet another one of these bizarre data points that links back to Donald Trump and connection. So the practical question at this point is, what can we hope for? What Epstein is dead. What is it that we can hope to get from the entire Jeffrey Epstein thing? I think that there are three things. Number one, we truly, definitively need to try to find out the truth about Epstein's death. I'm not optimistic, as I said, that we're ever going to know that to the full satisfaction of those who find something strange about the circumstances. The story is extremely odd. It's difficult to fully believe, but okay, that would be number one priority. What are the real circumstances of Epstein's death? Number two, we want to find out the full truth about any Trump involvement up to and including the fact that Trump was accused of raping a girl who was 13 years old at the time at Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan condo. We want that exposed to the fullest possible extent. And then number three, Epstein's dead, but Epstein didn't work alone. There were many people involved in Epstein being a predator. And the third thing I can think of that would be a priority would be for all of those people to be discovered, investigated, prosecuted when appropriate, and held responsible. So we'll be following it. Yet another just very strange data point. I think that that's the way I would say it, related to Jeffrey Epstein and the many connections to Donald Trump. Yesterday, I asked on Twitter at @dpacman, you should be following me, by the way, what stories should I definitely cover on tomorrow's show, that being today's program? And I got a bunch of people who said, David, you have to talk about how right-wing host Ben Shapiro is saying he doesn't believe Brett Kavanaugh's accusers because they haven't described Brett Kavanaugh's penis, which I assumed that can't really be what Ben Shapiro said. But alas, it is. And the reason I'm covering this is not just another wacky thing Ben Shapiro said, although it is yet another wacky thing that Ben Shapiro said. There's actually more to this. So let's set it up. Brett Kavanaugh has been accused again of sexual assault. Trump is off the rails tweeting about it. I told you about that earlier this week. And in comes Ben Shapiro, and he says the reason that he doubts the veracity of the allegations is that if Kavanaugh had really sexually assaulted anyone, the victims would have been able to describe Brett Kavanaugh's penis in detail by now. This apparently counts as an argument in some circles. Take a look at the video. Check it out.
We've had a bevy of public figures in recent years who have had their genitalia described on national television by people who allege sexual assault. Right? Stormy Daniels famously described President Trump's genitalia. Bill Clinton's genitalia. Details of such were talked about. Nobody has yet described Kavanaugh's genitalia. Now, that's not dispositive. Maybe they were generic. Who knows? But the bottom line is we've had no corroborating details on any of these stories. All of them apparently happened in public places with other witnesses available, and not one witness has been there who corroborates any of these stories. It's unbelievable. And yet the Democrats are still saying that Kavanaugh should be kicked off the Supreme Court based on what? A new report from a guy who says that he was at a party and saw a male grab Kavanaugh's penis, which, by the way, would be sexual assault, and then thrust it into the hand of a female who says she doesn't remember the incident.
It's so crazy that this is the argument that Ben Shapiro is making for why he doesn't believe the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. It's almost like he doesn't know how sex works, and I know he must because he has children, right? I mean, I don't know much about his personal life, but as far as I know, the humans that he calls his kids are biologically his kids, and as far as I would guess, they were conceived in sort of the normal way. So you would imagine he knows how sex works. I can't believe I'm doing this, but there are a few problems with this argument from Ben Shapiro. First of all, of course, is that incidents that happen at parties, sexual assaults, all of this stuff, many of these things happen in dark places. Like this is so rudimentary and fundamental. But from a logistical perspective, if something happens in a dark place, you may not have been able to look at identifying marks on Brett Kavanaugh's genitalia. That doesn't really seem like a big deal. It's not a big counterpoint to any of the accusers. Number two, in incidents of trauma, victims are often not focusing on, let me see if there are moles or birthmarks or skin discolorations on Brett Kavanaugh's genitalia. They're scared for their lives, they're being assaulted, and their priority likely is survival and getting away. So once again, not having in mind particular characteristics of Brett Kavanaugh's penis does not seem to be material in this case. And then maybe most importantly, this is a specious argument because, if you can even call it an argument, if a woman did describe Brett Kavanaugh's penis in her allegation, the defenders would just come up with some other way to dismiss that point. And I was actually reminded of Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson's penis. Michael Jackson, of course, the late pop star who had multiple allegations of child sexual assault against him. Michael Jackson's penis was described by accusers, and defenders just came up with excuses. I don't remember exactly what the excuses were, but listen, if someone describes Kavanaugh's penis, they could say, well, someone could have told them how to describe it. There could be a doctor with knowledge of his penis who is involved in the conspiracy, or it was a lucky guess. Or with Jackson was known to have vitiligo, the skin condition, so it would be just a safe guess to say that his penis also had discolorations because it's known that he had vitiligo or whatever. The point is, you can always defend it. Someone describes Kavanaugh's penis, well, they could have been in cahoots with a doctor who saw it once, or the description was too generic, or it's not accurate in some minute, irrelevant way, or whatever. And by the way, I think, let me link this back now beyond Ben Shapiro to really what is the issue. The media focus on Kavanaugh's behavior in high school and college instead of his lying to Congress and his extraordinarily suspicious financial transactions may at the higher level be both misguided and counterproductive, but that's a completely different story. So there's the analysis from Ben Shapiro. He wants the penis described in detail, or he is going to be skeptical of the allegations that have been made. This is 2019, and this is the world that we live in today. Let's take a quick break. Make sure you like The David Pakman Show on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Coming up next, a judge has been permanently barred from the bench for posting a pro-Trump MAGA message with a picture of a noose. Nice, right? We'll talk about that after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I have a story for you today from Altona, New York, where the town court justice named Kyle Canning has been permanently barred from the bench because he posted a pro-Trump MAGA Facebook post with a noose on it. Pretty nice stuff, right? I mean, not hugely surprising, but at least there are some consequences here. So this guy posted a picture of a noose with the text that read, "If we want to make America great again, we will have to make evil people fear punishment again." This is a judge who's posting this to social media. And Canning had already resigned back in June when this first went public. And then now he's been permanently banned and has to agree, quote, never to seek or accept judicial office at any time in the future. Now, why am I bringing this particular story up? It has nothing to do with this judge individually. It's great that this guy was caught. A complaint was filed. He's been barred from the bench, and he personally won't be making judicial decisions in the future, and that's a good thing. But there's a much bigger issue here, and it's an issue I've been talking more and more about over the last 3 to 6 months, which is that in general, the number of judges that Donald Trump has appointed who now are serving at different levels of courts, this particular one is not a Trump-appointed judge, to be clear. The real issue is that increasingly, thanks to Donald Trump, the courts are filled with people like this guy. Most of them have the wherewithal and common sense not to post this stuff to Facebook, but they're thinking the same things. They're making judicial decisions on the basis of these beliefs that they hold. And by the way, they're more and more under the radar, and they are destroying the fabric of the American judiciary as we know it. So there are actually really serious problems in general with right-wing judges. Remember that we know right-wing brains and left-wing brains are different. There are neurological differences, brain differences between left-wingers and right-wingers. We've talked about the really good studies into how the fear centers of right-wing brains are way bigger. If you have two judges, one who is much more afraid because of what their brain makeup is, you are going to see drastically different, or at least different, we would presume, decisions made about punishments and other legal decisions, judicial decisions that they make. Right-wingers are more likely to see others as inherently bad or as inherently sinners, depending on their religious persuasion. That is definitely going to make you, if you are a judge, choose very different punishments, have a very different outlook about what it is that should be done with the people that are convicted, for example, in the court that you preside over. And there's lots of really good research about this stuff. So what we have to understand is when we talk about Trump destroying alliances, when we talk about Trump tweeting that now the military is going to kick out trans people or whatever the case may be, we follow those stories, we pay attention to them. When Trump leaves, a lot of that stuff can be reversed. The next president, hopefully, if it's the right person, will be able to rebuild these ruined alliances with other countries. The next president will be able to, by executive order, reverse a lot of the things that Donald Trump did by executive order. Great. The bigger issue is that Supreme Court justices and other judges, a lot of these are lifetime appointments. And these are people who, even after Donald Trump is long gone from the White House, are going to continue making an impact on the fabric of the country, on one of the most important institutions that puts into effect one of the primary philosophical things that distinguishes one country from another, which is the sort of attitude and philosophy of the judiciary and how we punish people, rehabilitation versus punish, all of this stuff. This is an effect that Donald Trump is going to have for a very long time. And so what I go back to is the frustration. And I have no misconception. It's mostly right-wingers responsible for Donald Trump being president. They're the ones that voted for him. But those leftists, because I'm on the left, I want to make sure that I'm cleaning up my house as well. The leftists who insisted, Trump, Hillary, they're basically both establishment shills. They're both just rich people. It doesn't really matter which one becomes president. Obviously, that didn't make sense from day one, but one of the most acute and prevalent areas where it makes such a difference is when it comes to the judiciary and the judges that a president gets to select. Donald Trump, by one measure now, has selected about a quarter of the judges at a couple of different levels. Federal, I don't remember if it's federal and appeals, federal and superior, or whatever the case may be. So we've got the research. These right-wing judges are biologically different. Their brains are different. Their fear centers are enlarged. And then you've got a lot of them that are thinking the same things as this Kyle Canning guy, who would love to, or at least agree with, noose pictures talking about MAGA. They're not posting it. This is one guy that we got out. That's good news. But the problem is really, really big. And truly, this is a bigger problem than Trump. In the short term, the best thing we can do is get Trump out so that he stops being able to appoint any judges whatsoever. Reminder, the Kyle Canning was not appointed by Trump. I understand that. But bigger picture, we really have to be thinking about the problems inherent with the judiciary system that we have. Okay, I got a voicemail that actually, it's sort of I don't know if it's a troll or someone just trying to instigate, but they actually bring up something really important that I've discussed before. So let's take a listen to it. I'll remind you, our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. A few reminders with peace and love. If you leave a 3-minute voicemail and get cut off and call back because you had something that was longer than 3 minutes and you have to finish it, the voicemail is not getting played. We've never played these 3-minute voicemails on the show. So keep them pithy, keep them short, get right to the point. Let's take a listen to this one that came in overnight.
Hey, David. I was curious how you and other self-described progressive pundits on YouTube are content with profiting off of...
First of all, the word is pundit, not pundent. But go ahead.
Right-wing controversy while simultaneously decrying the far right. For example, you, Sam Cedar, Kyan Kulinski, the Young Turks, etc., are arguably their biggest platform. For example, you felt compelled to appear on Jesse Lee Peterson's show not only once, but twice, because somehow appearing on a racial sellout podcast is going to help the civil discourse in America. Then you also interviewed Richard Spencer, a literal Nazi, have had Ben Shapiro on, and most recently, Sam Harris, who's a race realist and is on record saying, people just don't know how to get arrested, quote unquote, in response to racial profiling in the U.S. How is this not more counterproductive than beneficial to the free marketplace of ideas and civil discourse in America? Thank you, David.
So listen, there's a bunch of different issues here that we need to discuss. First of all, this idea of profit. You're against right-wing ideas, but you profit by criticizing them. I just don't even understand that argument. It's like, oh, you're an environmental cleanup company advocating for corporations to be more careful so that they don't destroy the environment. You're against environmental destruction, but you're profiting from cleaning it up. I mean, that's a very, very weak argument. I think the more interesting question here is one of responsible platforming and of making decisions sort of for the greater good. I've said this before. When we do a show, we do a mix of policy analysis, things like what should government regulation of social media look like? And we spend a half hour dealing with that. And we do comments about, stories about Trump's latest unhinged tweets or whatever. My approach has always been, we want to do the most good possible. And part of doing the most good possible is having the largest possible audience while still being able to do the stories we want to do. So when we do the story about Trump's erratic tweets or Trump's erratic rally or whatever, it is not the deepest, most important policy analysis, but it gets a lot of attention and it brings people into our universe, who then are in our universe when we do the policy analysis about government regulation of social media or comparing different healthcare plans and different ways in which Medicare for All could be implemented or whatever. So I find it to be, there's this guy named Carl Benjamin. You might know him as Sargon of Akkad. He once accused me of using clickbait YouTube titles. And I brought him on a couple of years ago and I said, it sounds like what you're accusing me of doing is picking YouTube titles that will make people want to watch the videos. If the titles are accurate, it's called marketing to choose titles that are more likely to make someone want to watch the video than less likely to want to watch the video. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And only a very sort of myopic framework would really focus on those as the issues. Now, with regard to me interviewing Richard Spencer, this is a long-standing debate, which is, what am I really doing by interviewing an extremist? And the answer is, are they being responsibly platformed, or are they being given a platform to uncritically spout propaganda, which may actually convince people to come over to their side, or whatever the case may be? People can disagree about this, but we've been talking about this for years. I believe that if I am well prepared to refute bad ideas, and the ideas are prominent enough that there is some benefit to refuting them or exposing them, or whatever the case may be, I have no problem with responsibly platforming those people. And just mentioning the marketplace of ideas or whatever, that's just a talking point. It doesn't actually mean anything. And these talking points being repeated ad nauseum does nothing to actually allow us to think critically about what are the goals of independent media, what are the sort of guidelines that independent media should responsibly adhere to. So if you were just trolling, then I guess I fell for it and I answered it like it was a serious question. I think you raise totally valid questions. What is responsible platforming? What is the goal of independent media shows? What is the line between marketing honestly to get people's attention versus being deceptive, right? And these are all debates that are individual. They are different. I'm willing to have all of them. They're all legitimate. And if you're a good faith actor wanting to discuss them, I invite you to call into the show and we can talk more about it. Make sure to remember that the voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. We've got a fantastic bonus show for you today. Donald Trump now says that homelessness is hurting what he calls real estate prestige. We'll discuss that on the bonus show. We will talk about Richard Stallman, a free software pioneer who I have interviewed before. He has quit his role at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, because of some comments he made on a listserv about Jeffrey Epstein's case. And we will also talk about the resurgence of the Mayor Pete versus Beto battle on gun control. It's not a battle that will be consequential in terms of the Democratic primary. Neither one of them has a shot, but it's interesting nonetheless. All of those stories and much more on today's bonus show. 2 ways to get instant access. Become a member at joinpacman.com or become a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I'll speak to you on the bonus show, or otherwise, if you don't get access to the bonus show, sadly, I will still be right back here tomorrow with a brand new show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.